First thing I'll let you guys know is that it's kind of chilly in here, so if it gets too cold, go to the washroom. The washrooms are like 35 degrees. They're the hottest washrooms in the whole world. So I'm Jim Benson, and I got my start in psychology. Studied psychology for a while, realized that if I graduated in psychology, my peers would be psychologists, and then I'd have to talk to psychologists all the time, and that was kind of frightening. So I did go into urban planning, and so for about 15 years, built light rail systems and freeways and neighborhoods and giant things. And in those sometimes 100 million, sometimes multi-billion dollar scopes of work, there'd be this little line item that would say software. So for me, software was always like a little thing that came in the middle of all of the quote unquote hard stuff. In '99, I left my cushy job as a underpaid manager in a consulting engineering firm and started a software company. And we were an all Agile shop. So, and our clients were all government. So we sold Agile to government in '99, 2000 and on. And we got them to rewrite their contracts to conform to our Agile processes. And that was kind of cool. And man, I got really good at arguing for things like story points and iterations and stand-up meetings and stuff. But as time went on, I started to realize that there was awesome Agile rhetoric and a lot of crap in Agile. And it was becoming disturbing because as Scrum was becoming more and more popular, it was basically like there was like, with XP it was like, there's like a little bit of crap, and then with Scrum it was like through the roof. And so I became concerned, and so we started to seek out, what was the problem? What were the problems that we were seeing? And I'll talk about some of them tonight, but what ended up happening was my friend David Anderson and I were looking at alternate ways to, not necessarily to manage projects and not to eschew or shun Agile, but ways to fix the things that we saw that were repeatedly wrong in Agile teams. So a couple of weeks ago I did a keynote in Michigan, and it was all Agile anti-patterns. It was literally an hour and a half of really funny Agile anti-patterns that I had Muppet videos for each one that would show Muppets acting out each of the Agile anti-patterns. So that's who I am, but tonight's talk isn't necessarily that. Tonight's, and I am a Muppet. In my consulting engineering firm, they actually voted me engineer most likely to be a Muppet. So you'll see me flail my arms and stuff several times tonight. But one of my main issues with Agile, and one of the things that Lean was kind of getting us beyond, is that Agile is very focused on the team, and kind of pathologically focused on the team to the point that the team starts to isolate itself and not become part of the company anymore. We'll talk more about that. And we'll talk about basically what our original goals for Agile were, and maybe some alternate ways to achieve those goals while not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And at the heart of all this for me is what Kent Beck talked a lot about in his books, which is constant process improvement. So there shouldn't be a right way to do process. Every product that software teams create is different. The teams are different, the customers are different, the marketplace is different, the technology stacks are different. You've got all of these different things. Why do we think that one process could possibly work for all of these different projects? And so this card is like, what is Kaizen? So Kaizen basically means continuous improvement. We want to develop cultures of continuous improvement where we're always looking at our processes and saying, what's not right here? And how can we make that better? so I'll just barge headlong into the Actually, I'm not going to talk about that yet. So one of the other things about Kanban, you can do things in different orders. So I'm going to start down here. When I was a young, angry punk rocker, and it was awesome because even at the age of like 19, I could have a logo, right? And what one of the goals of punk rock was to I don't know, question all authority. Juvenile, puerile urge to question all authority, which is of course what made Agile seem so great, because Agile was always like, we hate our managers and we just want to be strong teams, and if only our managers would leave us alone, we'd magically create awesome software. So this didn't actually go away, and so with personal Kanban we have 2 rules, and just 2 rules. And it's to visualize your work and to limit your work in progress. It's based on 2 radical notions. The first notion is that we can better manage what we can see, and we very rarely can see our work in software development. And the second is we can't do more work than we can handle, and we're always taking on more work than we can handle in software development. So when people can see what's going on and they're doing a reasonable amount of work, magically, software quality goes up. Who'd have guessed? So we'll go through the quick thing about this. Regardless of what you want to say about me, that's where you can. So this is like the nickel tour of Kanban or personal Kanban. We want to visualize our work. And in order to visualize our work, we need to actually see the framework or the process that the work is flowing through. Excuse me. And so we want to see what's called the value stream. And the value stream are the steps that we take to create value. And for a software development project, like a simple one, you might start off with one that's like coding, testing, integration, and release. The simplest one might be this, which is ready, doing, and done, which is basically stuff I haven't done yet, stuff I'm doing, and stuff that I've completed. So that's pretty easy. Or stuff I haven't done yet, stuff I'm doing, stuff I've completed. Regardless of what order I choose to do it in. So then, we have all the stuff that we're supposed to do, and we write them all down on Post-it notes, or if it's an electronic tool, we type them into little fake Post-it notes on the screen on the electronic tool. I cannot tell you how fundamentally weird it is to one night be having a conversation with a friend of yours in a bar about whether or not you should put Post-it notes on a piece of paper, and then a few years later there's 30 companies making online tools that look like Post-it notes on pieces of paper. And some of them are quite good. So we populate our backlog with all the stuff that we're supposed to be doing, and we have different work item types. So, these might be bugs and these might be features, or vice versa. These could be technical debt, whatever it is that your group is working on. And those are us too. And we're building here something interesting. And we first noticed this in one of our first projects after I closed my software company and just started doing this as a consulting thing. One of our first projects, we noticed that we were working for a global entertainment company. And they had a team in New York, a team in Los Angeles, and a team in Chennai. And all of the teams hated each other. All 3 of them hated all of the other 3, right? And they hated them for all sorts of bogus reasons. So there was one team on one coast that was really, really laid back and didn't follow any plans, and there was another team that was all plan driven and they were all uptight. And the kind of cool thing was that the team in New York was the laid back team and the team in Los Angeles was the uptight team. But these three teams were always at each other's throats. And of course, both teams in the States were saying, oh, you know, those guys in Chennai, they're crazy and they're Indian and they say yes when they mean no and blah, 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 and it's all culture. Well, in the end, it wasn't culture. So we set up a kanban, I started using the kanban, and then things got better. And they're like, this is weird. I mean, I know that people are happier because they can see what's going on, but why are they this happy? And so we went around and talked to a lot of people over the years to figure out what was going on. What we finally figured out was that this thing here, got a lot of room up here to write, it's kind of nice. This is a story arc, right? So all of a sudden we can now see the story of the project. And this is like kind of the plot, and these are the plot points, and these are like suspense. So it's kind of, oh, what's he gonna pull next? And ooh, you know, will it get done, and will it be of sufficient quality not to come back? And crazily enough, that's actually enough to keep us engaged, because we've never had this before. So, like right now, if I show you a map of the Vancouver region, and you know, you see the water, you see the Fraser, you'll see you know, the major streets, you'll see 99, you see whatever, right? And you'll know it instantly. If I show you a map of Paris, you will instantly know how all of the roads radiate out and where the rivers are and so on and so forth. If I show you any map, you will translate that map literally in less than a second. Because most of our brains are geared towards the processing of visual information. So if we have a bunch of stuff stuck in a backlog tool, it's the same thing as if I gave you that map, but instead of the map I took it back and I said, you know what? Instead I'm going to list for you every street in Vancouver, every river in the area, every geo-coordinate of every bend of every part of the waterways and the riparian areas, and then you have to read it, and then when you're done you tell me what it's like, right? That's what we get out of Jira, or other tools like it. I'll say that behind you, so no tool vendors come after me. So what we want to do here is we want to build a map of our work. We want people to walk up and see it and go, oh crap, I see this hasn't been done yet, this is in process, this is complete. This team currently is, you know, operating at their work in progress limit. I see that, you know, this one might be in distress for some reason or another. You get a lot of information almost immediately. You know, if you've got little magnets or something here with faces on it, you know who's working on what. And well, there's all sorts of stupid Kanban tricks that I can show you later. But the goal here, what you might notice, is regardless of any bitchy things that I might say about Scrum or anything else, and I'm filled with bitchy things to say about things, regardless of any of that, this device is merely a visualization tool. So anybody that tells you that there is a methodology behind the board is selling you something. So you can visualize what you're doing right now, and in fact you should, regardless of what it is. If it's Scrum, if it's XP, if it's RUP, if it's waterfall, if it's no process whatsoever, I don't care. Just do this. This is no process whatsoever. But just start seeing what's going on. And then as you see it, you will notice that there will be breakdowns in flow, that some things will get stuck while other things will move smoothly. And then you'll be able to figure out what your process should be at the time to smooth out those problems. You'll be able to understand what the role of variation is in your work, which I'll get to in a little bit. And then you can make your own decisions to build your own process. This is process Lego. It's not process Lego to build a Death Star. It's the big box of just Lego. You build whatever it is that you want. End of soapbox. Drink some water. Does that make sense so far? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the WIP limit. So, software developers have had a hard time managing software development because we've convinced ourselves that we're special. And we are kind of special, but we're not really special in this way. We're kind of special in that one. And the reason is because software development basically involves everything, right? You have to do math, you have to know language, you have to know presentation, you have to know just about everything to make good software, which means that you have to have a lot going on upstairs, which means that sometimes you might not communicate as well with your friends as other people. So one of the reasons for that is because often our work in progress looks more like this. Actually, I know you can't stick things on these plastic things, so we'll just. But this is more likely what the average software developer's plate looks like. How many people here are simultaneously employed and need more stuff to do? So, what happens here is we're running afoul of several things, and the first is called the Zeigarnik effect. And the Zeigarnik effect says two things. One, it says that when I finish something and I move on, I get closure and I forget about it. I have really finished it, it's really done, I'm really ready to move on. When I start something and I don't finish it, I don't stop thinking about it. So that means that the little smartphone between our ears is running like 75 apps at the same time, and we're wondering why it's sluggish to get the camera to come up. So what we want to do instead is run some little routine that says I'm only going to be doing 3 apps at a time, and I'm going to focus on the crap that I'm working on. And then when I finish something, then I will pull something else. I'll finish something, and then I'll pull something else. So, we have 3 things that we're doing. I have a little story about that. So, when I was a kid, and as we've covered, I grew up in the middle of nowhere, so no one can call Child Protective Services proactively, or post-childly, on my parents. But I was 11, and my brother would have been 7 or 8. And we were watching television, and we were home alone because my parents were at a friend's of theirs house. Again, we're in Nebraska, nothing could happen to us. They'd left us dinner. We were industrious, so we made our own dinner, which meant that we got some Cocoa Puffs, and we were eating the Cocoa Puffs out of the box. And so we're sitting there watching television, and we had this little dog named Cookie, who was like a little French poodle. And Cookie loved to eat absolutely everything, including like whole trays of baklava. So at one point my mother made this huge whole tray of baklava, which is like basically, well, it's baklava, right? So she gets up there, she eats the whole tray of baklava, and then like oozes butter for like a week. So thankfully in this case she's only eating Cocoa Puffs. So she wants a Cocoa Puff, and so we like take Cocoa Puff out of the box and throw her a Cocoa Puff, and she catches it. And so then we take another one out, and she catches that, and we're like, okay, whatever. So we throw 2, and she catches both of those, and we're like, it's pretty cool. So we throw 2 again, and she catches them again. And then we throw 3, and she catches all 3. And so we take that, and so we throw 4, and she catches 3, and 1 falls on the floor. And then we do 5, and she catches 2, and 2 fall on the floor. And then, of course, then we get to the Tootsie Pop ad thing, so it's like a 1, a 2, a 3, crunch, a 3. So we reach in the thing, pull out a whole handful, throw them at the dog, and the dog goes. And then she catches nothing, and they all fall on the floor, and then she eats them off the floor and wants to have some more Cocoa Puffs. But the thing was that when we got above 3, she had a provable Cocoa Puff WIP limit of 3. When we got above 3, she would gradually, her performance would degrade to the point where she was just freaked out and couldn't do anything. Now, I have a graph for you. This is a graph. Most graphs start like this. Most graphs have time down here. So this is time. This is your deadline. This is your start point. And this is crap. Right? And this is your graph. As we approach deadlines, we become more and more like the dog. We end up trying to finish all of this stuff by the deadline. We freak out, and we build almost all of our technical debt right here. All right? Does that make sense? I mean, does that kind of make sense? All right. Because when we're doing iterations, we do this every 2 weeks. Believe me, it really sucked when I figured that out one day. I was like, oh my God, all of our technical debt comes like in the last 2 days of a sprint. This kind of sucks. So there you go. That's the Zeigarnik effect, and that's my dog. So, actually I'll go really quickly. So remember when I said, so we got 3 things here, right? Now before we had 3 things here, we had a different number. It was shaped like that. And basically, whenever anybody comes and asks us to do shit, we say, yes, I'd love to do that for you. And the reason is because we like our jobs, we want to do a good job, and we're nice. Canadians are nice. I owned a place in Falls Creek. I know. You guys are nice. You didn't let me deduct my interest on my mortgage like they do in the States, which wasn't very nice, but otherwise pretty nice. So this number is bigger than this number, a little bit, right? So when we're saying that we're going to take all that stuff on, it's not because we're idiots and we want to load up on stuff. It's because we honestly have this number means that each thing that comes in here is worth 1 over this. Our economy is this. Value of this, 0. 0. That sucks. Now we have set up an economy where the value of this is now literally 33% of everything you can trade that day. Right? So all of a sudden now, when something disappears from here and I'm going to pull something in, the value of this has gone way up. So when I pull something in, it had better be honestly the most important thing or for me or for my team to be working on. So, pull, push, pull, push. So I'm your boss and I'm me. And I say, hey, do this. That's push. That sucks. Don't want to do that. Don't want to do that because I'm basically now putting you in a position where you are going to fail because you have way too much work and I am expecting this stuff to get done. Why did I do that? I did that because right now, this is the level of visibility I have into your work. Giving you new tasks has 0 value. I can do it all day long and I can demand that I get stuff and you have no authority to stop me, not because I'm an overbearing boss, but because right now, all you could say is, I think I've got too much to do, which makes you a whiner, which gets you fired. So you just don't want to do that. But now, I'm a boss or boss-like object. And I show up and I say, hey, I would like you to do this little 10-minute task. And I say, hey, ooh, you're doing a bunch of stuff and it all has value, right? And you've got this stuff coming up and that has value, so you should do it when you get around to it. Or, this is pretty important, I need you to do it right away. Or, it's, I'm having a heart attack and I need you to get the defibrillator, do it now. So, if you have a e-commerce platform and your load balancer goes down, everything's dark, you're not going to say, I'm working on this report, I'll get to it in a couple of days. You will actually put it in here. And it's like, it's a horrific task. 4 is greater than 3. No one dies, it's okay. But we understand why we've exceeded the capacity of our economy. There's a real problem here that we really have to solve. And when we get it done, we do something else that we very rarely did in Agile. One is, rather than complain about it, we recognize that it really happened. We embrace it. Say, you sucked and you hurt me. And now I'm going to get together everybody and we are going to have a retrospective now while we still remember what happened, and we're going to figure out a way to make this never happen again. We're not going to wait for 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years to have our stupid retrospectives because it's a ritual. We're going to have a retrospective because something really happened. In Lean, they call that a Kaizen event. So we want to have the retrospective when it's going to have the highest value. This isn't to say we don't want to still have regularly scheduled ones, but it's always going to say, don't put off improvement until tomorrow that you can improve today. Because the longer you put it off, the more likely it is to happen again. So that was the push side. So come over here to the pull side and say, okay, so I've got capacity now. And I'm going to pull whatever it is that I think is the most important thing or has been determined is the most important thing in there. And I've pulled because there's capacity. So I have another story that goes with that. So, also when I was a kid, because basically everything happened to me when I was a kid, when I was 14, I had my first job as a busboy at the Village Inn Pancake House on South Locust Street in Grand Island, Nebraska. In Grand Island, Nebraska, like most cities in the US, we had minimum wage. For 14-year-olds, we had something that we called sub-minimum wage. So I got to work for sub-minimum wage. And we had 2 rules there. And the first rule was never talk to the customers. I'm not kidding. And the second one was always pull, never push the bus cart. So, I'm wandering around, and it's the 70s, so I'm like cleaning up people's cigarette butts, cigarette butts, cigarette butts, cigarette butts, cigarette butts, and Coke, and then occasionally a pancake. One of my colleagues, other 14-year-old colleagues, was very excited to get home because he wanted to go play Atari or something. And so he has his bus cart, he's behind his bus cart, and he's running into the kitchen. And he gets to the point between the carpet in the restaurant to the linoleum in the kitchen, and he hits it and the whole thing goes up and over. And he's kind of standing there, kind of twitches a little bit. Then he starts crying, then he starts laughing, and he starts crying, and he's like 14, he's not really a kid, he's not really an adult, he's just kind of some kind of weird thing in between. And he's kind of like freaking out, and our boss comes out, and he kind of looks at it, and he looks at him, and he doesn't have any problems with this at all. He says, go home and don't come back. And then he looked back into the kitchen where all the teenagers were laughing at the prepubescent kid, and he said, you guys, you get to clean all this up. And I'm basically like, I'm not pulling the cart. I'm not pushing the cart. So when we're pulling something, we know it's an intentional act. We know the terrain that we're pulling it in. So if he was pulling the bus cart, like every 10 million bus cart trips before him, he would have got to that and gone, boom, and gone over. But as it was, you know, all of his force was behind, and it went up and over. So what we want to build here with the kanban is a two-tiered pull system. So the first one is saying, hey devs, you have a zone of control here. And you have a bunch of things that are coming up. You have a limited supply of things you can be doing right now. And when that moves over, you can come over here and you can choose whatever it is you want to work on next, based on what seems to be the most appropriate. And life is good. So there's that pull system. Then there's the second pull system, which is, see, we got ready, doing, and done, but this is kind of like the Agile view of the world. And then we kind of placate the rest of the world by over here we'll put a product owner. Poorest thought out, most thankless job in the world. And the product owner is the person who's putting stuff in there, right? But over here, there's probably somebody who's telling the product owner what to do. And over here, there's probably marketing. And over here, there's probably a business development. And over here, there's probably blah, 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 blah. So there's all of this stuff coming up to the team that we've been kind of shut out from. And then over here, somewhere, there's, you know, done, and then there's deployment and blah, 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 blah. But way out here somewhere, hardly known to the team at all, is a customer. Like the person who's actually paying for this crap, right? And ultimately, anything that's in this column, regardless of what I, as a dev, get to choose, any of this needs to have customer value, right? So the customer is over here with their iPhone app or whatever, pulling value out of our system. Does that make sense? So we're pulling in our zone of control, and the customer is pulling value through the whole company. And if we get overly fixated on this relationship, then we will get then basically we become a narcissistic development team, and we don't actually develop stuff that people want. So we need to make sure that we have kind of those two pull systems going on simultaneously. I don't want to talk about that. So what we're building here is a system of flow. And we can do 2-week releases if we liked the 2-week model. But what we're not doing is we're not getting together at the beginning of that 2-week period and playing planning poker or going through all of these rituals that we go through to, frankly, waste a lot of our time before starting a development process. So what we tend to do, or what Kanban teams tend to do, don't have to, you can totally do this with iterations if you want, but what they tend to do is set up a flow-based system, which means that there's a natural rate of flow of work through here. And you can measure that rate of flow, and all of a sudden you start to get some things that we never had before, such as real completion times for tasks. So, we have a task here, comes to here, goes to here. We have moments in time that are easily identifiable. I pull this, I begin it, my team does a bunch of stuff, and after a while it ends up in done. This movement is called your cycle time. It's a real number. Real. Real's kind of awesome. Real's kind of scary. Real's kind of real. Before this real number, we had an imaginary number called a story point. So story points are attached to something called velocity. If you ask people who have worked in Agile for a long time, and you say, what is a story point? They will say a story point is a relative measure of effort, or a relative effort or measure of complexity for a given task. And then you say, are they meant to be descriptive of the amount of time you would spend? And they will say no. You say, are they meant to be the same from team to team? And they would say no. Yet, for some reason, we take that number and we measure and we divide it by another number and we come up with our velocity. And then we report that as an integer to other people, and the other people consume that integer as if it meant something, which in fact it does not. And then we get into almost every discussion about velocity that has ever happened at any company I've ever been to. So velocity, piece of paper here. So velocity is an imaginary number divided by an arbitrary amount of time. That's the arbitrary amount of time. That's an F. There. AOT. Imaginary number divided by an arbitrary amount of time. Not helpful. Easily gamed. Easily confused. Awful to try and talk to other people about. Useful for a while. Ultimately, a very, very, very politically and managerially dangerous number. With your kanban, look, it's that shape again. You can have your time, and you can have time to complete. And let's get a different color here, because I'm going to mark right over my incendiary diagram here. And you start to plot out the actual completion times of the things that you worked on. Right? And then you can use statistics. You can actually use real numbers to plan something for like the first time ever. And so we say, okay, well, I think I've got like about an 85% chance. This is my 85% line. We know that anything you bring us is going to be done in this amount of time or less. So the moment that somebody gives you something, puts something in your ready queue, you know that it's going to take this amount of time or less to complete. So you can actually give people a service level agreement. And you say, we are guaranteeing to you that we will complete anything you bring to us in 3 weeks or less. Now, it's going to have to pass through one filter, and that's the I'm not going to do that filter. So there are two sizes for tasks. Not 13, not 26, not some crazy spiral. There are two sizes for tasks. I can do that, and I cannot do that. So human beings are really good at that level of planning. So there is something called the planning fallacy. Honest to God, cognitive bias that every human being ever born suffers from, regardless of how anal retentive or otherwise they might be. It has been measured, it has been studied on every continent, with every population, with every gender, with every, football fetish that you might come up with. Every human being falls prey to this, and is governed by something that's called Hofstadter's Law. And Hofstadter's Law says that for complex tasks, human beings will underestimate every task, even if they're aware of Hofstadter's Law, right? When we go through a planning poker exercise, it makes us feel good, but it's not actually helping us. show you why. Told you you'd have to listen to this again. So I was working with a company, it was a financial services firm, and they had a whole bunch of developers, and I told them, you know, why don't we measure how long it really takes us to complete things and plan off of that rather than planning off of velocity? And they said, well, you know, we're really good at story points here. So, you know, we've heard what you've said, we've watched your videos and stuff, but we want you to know that we've actually measured it and we're really good. I was like, well, great. Can you know, by the next time I come back, can you show me some graphs and show me, you know, how great you are? And they said, well, we can do better than that. We've already got the graphs. So they get all excited and they run away and they bring back the graphs. And the graphs seriously look like this. So they say, one story point, one, 3, 5. And they're like, we're really, really good, and if we could just get rid of these, we'd be perfect. And I'm like, yeah, you would be. And there'd be two things that were true about that. So the first thing I told them, because this was like, they were dealing with stock traders, they had a whole stock trading floor at the base of their thing. I said, if you could get rid of this, you're on the wrong floor. Okay? All of these are perfect Pareto curves. All of theirs were perfect Pareto curves. Pareto distributions are like the most dangerous things ever for human beings because this gives us the illusion of correctness. It gives us an illusion of control, which is another cognitive bias. So we have a cognitive bias of illusion of control running headlong into what in lean thinking is called variation. So variation is basically saying that, yeah, you know, we can guess a bunch of stuff, but there's always, in any human system, there's going to be a level of variation. Human beings cannot know perfection. It's that simple. I didn't say it, Buddha said it. Take it up with him. So these are honest to God one point stories. These are 3-point stories. These are 5-point stories, all the way up the curve. This is not an incorrect estimate. This is not an incorrect estimate. But when we're busting our sprints, or we're staying till midnight on a Friday night to get something out, we feel like we incorrectly estimated something. But the moment that this 1-point thing looks like this, coders don't make this anymore. They make this. Because we get paid for this shit here. We don't get paid for this. We get paid because this is actually difficult to do. Because we have to figure out our way around things. So when we come back to actually measuring what happens, scatter diagram doesn't care what you estimated something at, because your SLA was here, and you had your 1-point story, 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 your 1-point story. Scatter diagram doesn't care, right? So you have this, you got an additional 15% up here, you know, a bunch of them fall into here, which is like the oops, you know, this is like 3 weeks in a day. Up here, you know, you have the, maybe you might want to talk about doing this again. And then when you get up to this stuff, you say, dude, I think we should have a really long conversation. But I had somebody the other day call these the expanding stickies, where you think that they're going to take a certain amount of time, but they just keep getting bigger and bigger. But the thing is, I mean, we've all been here. We've all been here. But the thing is, we also know that we figure that out down here. Down here, we know that we're going to be up there. So the more that we have tools that allow us to raise a red flag here and say, this seems a lot more complex than what I thought it was. Let's talk about it. Let's do something about it. You know, maybe you swarm on it and you fix it and everything's fine. Maybe you tell them that it's crazy and you can't do it at all. Maybe you go back to the drawing board and you come up with a different solution. I don't know. But what I do know is that once you start thinking this way, you start putting the brakes on a lot more things than you ever did before. And part of the reason for that is that this ticket, that sticky, is now 1/3 of all of the stickies you're ever going to have. So you can't set this on the back of your desk anymore and wait until the end of the project or the end of the sprint or the end of whatever to do it. You've pulled it, you got to finish it, or you got to talk about it, or you got to do something with it. Does that make sense? You guys are a quiet bunch.
May I ask you something? In this case, when you needed to exceed your capacity basically for those emergency tasks, will you ever go back basically from your doing stuff to your end stuff?
No, because you already started it.
But if it is early start and that emergency thing is a bit longer, and I know that I can't complete it anytime soon, so it's a task that sits there and nobody's looking at it.
Yeah, but what I would say is that, okay, so this is your horrible emergency. Oh wait, they're close. We'll stay consistent. So this is our horrible emergency. As a team member and as a manager, I want this to be as ugly as possible. So what I don't want to do is sweep it under the rug by doing this and saying everything's fine, because it's not. So what we want is we want the board to be showing us how ugly things really are, so that we're inclined to make them prettier in the future. Because what this is, that movement is a hero movement, right? Now, I'll say a couple things about heroes really quick. One is, every company needs heroes, and any rhetoric that tells you that heroes are objectively bad has obviously never been applied in a real company at any time, ever. But the problem with heroes is that when heroes become ingrained, and then the heroes become the system, that's the problem. You should always have like a database expert. It's okay, you know. It's okay to have an XML expert. It's okay to have, you know, people that actually do know something that other people don't know. The whole generalist thing is a nice goal, but if you've been in parts of teams that are building anything even moderately complex, it's dangerous to have everybody just, you know, trying to focus on absolutely everything. But when this emergency comes up, I really do suggest that it's treated like an emergency. So the problem is, this is no longer an emergency. This is an emergency. This is an emergency simply because of Jim Henson. This is our Sesame Street brain going, 3-4, 3-4, I can't deal with it. They're not the same. And then when it goes away, we're like, ah. You know, oddly enough, I'm reasonably sure that if everybody had, you know, little galvanic skin responsive, you know, meters on their wrists, it just went up. Now it went down again. Once we set a visible policy and then we break it, it causes us angst. So one of the things that's crazy is I noticed that the teams that are visualizing their workflow, even if they're doing nothing else different, but all of a sudden they're confronted with bottlenecks, or they're confronted with work starvation, or they're confronted with other things that they already knew were happening. If they're confronted with it visually, they're really likely to try and fix it. But if it looks like this, then all we do is complain about it. Because we don't have a system to fix. System to fix. Blissful ignorance.
Every situation that goes over your capacity
Mm-hmm.
warranted to be like spotlighted. Let's just say you just finished pulling in the third story because of your capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the boss is like, last minute, no, I want you to switch it out because I'm sorry, you missed it by like literally 5 minutes. We had just we didn't even start anything, but now we're gonna raise a big stink because
Right.
we're trying to insert a fourth one and we're now
Yeah.
in an emergency situation.
Okay, I love that
Where
question.
where is the fine line? How wide is the
How
fine
far wide is the
How
fine
wide
line?
is the fine line?
So I love that question because it is such a kick in the teeth for me. One of the things that drives me absolutely crazy about Scrum is product owners can't insert new things into the sprint after the sprint is started. It drives me completely berserk. And if many teams don't do that, and bless their hearts, but most of them run that way. So in this case, let's say, for example, we're just getting up to a release, and I'm the product owner. I'm like, wait, I ticket, and I come up here and I put this in. One of a couple of things can happen. So go back to one thing. I have 2 rules, which are to visualize your work and limit your work in progress. And after that, I really don't care what you do. So let's say that you have a team, and right now, you got 6 people on the team, and they're all pairing on these 3 tickets. Now all of a sudden, this crazy last thing comes in. And so you have an economy. The economy is full. You have a trade that is desirable, and you have to ask yourself, is the value to exercise this option large enough for us to violate our policies? Is it large enough for us to say, okay, this team, one of them is going to work on this and one of them is going to work on this, and they're not going to pair? Is it large enough to say that this story is no longer important and we're going to do this one instead? What is the appropriate response to this new high option value that we've been given that has an immediate decay? So when everything that pops up here in your ready column or prior to it is an option, and we choose to exercise those options, or we exercise those options based on some simple economic rules. So the first is, well, I guess a couple of things are true about this. One is that all options have value, and when they don't have value, they're no longer options, they're waste. So if this has 0 value and you do it, then you just wasted your time. The next thing is that option values decay over time. Christmas presents bought on December 27th are less valuable than ones bought on December 23rd. The other thing is that they're relative. So in this case, we're hypothesizing that each of these have a certain option value, and all of a sudden this has a much higher option value. The difference here is that this number is making us ask these questions. And then when these questions come up, we can take whatever action we feel as a group, management and workers and, I don't know, friends and family alike. You can blog about it and have everybody on the internet vote on it if you want. But what is the appropriate action to take here? And so what I don't want is for anybody to think that this number requires you to genuflect. There's nothing religious about this number, and in fact, if you watch this. I don't want it to see me coming. That number changed. Holy crap! Look at that. I've totally broken my CMMI rating now. Nothing at all ever in your process is sacrosanct. Most teams that we work with will have at these transition points the policies that are required for things to move, like from dev to test or from test to integration or whatever they might be. And I like them every 2 weeks to ask the simple question, are people still doing these? And if you're not doing them, cross them out. And if crossing them out causes you pain, then you should probably think about that. And if they don't cause you pain, then you don't need to worry about it. But what we tend not to do is we tend not to ever question our policies, but we do tend to ignore them a lot. So what ends up happening then is in the future when something goes wrong, you can blame the people for not following the policies as opposed to actually going in and figuring out what really went wrong. So I believe that the best way to make someone, to have somebody break a rule is to make the rule for them to break in the first place. So lean thinking tells us that we want to decrease our inventory as much as possible because we have to maintain our inventory, right? We have to store it, we have to pay attention to it, we have to make sure that there aren't rats in it and so forth. For software development, we have 3 key kinds of inventory. One is our backlog. So all of those features that are right now backing up in version 1 or whatever, those are all inventory. And every single one of them that's in there costs you money every day. Because it's an option value that you're holding, it's an option that you're holding open, which means that it's an option that you're constantly reevaluating, constantly making decisions about. The second inventory that we just talked about are policies. And the policies are the rules of governance that you have to pay attention to all the time. And the more you have to pay attention to, the more you're paying attention to them. The more you're paying attention to them, the less you're paying attention to coding. Okay. The third one is code. Our job as coders is not to write code, it's to not write code. Every line of code we write costs us money. Not just to create, but then to go back and refactor, and then go back and refactor, and then go back and refactor, and go back and refactor, and go back and refactor. To dig through when we're looking for the technical debt because we can't figure out where it is because that person was such a crazy coder. The least amount of product that we can release, and I'm not going all lean startup on you either. I mean seriously, like even if you're doing enterprise scale software, the least amount of code you can release is the best amount of code that you can release. We're not in the epic, novel business. We're in the haiku business.
There is a phrase, every line of code is a liability.
Yes. Every line of code is not sacred.
So I hear you correctly. You need policies around things moving back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Because that happens in real life.
Now, yes, it can. But we have to ask ourselves, what is happening when it moves back and forth? So if I start this and I'm working on it for a while, and then I am waiting on an external resource. It should not move back to here because it did not become less done. But what it can do, we'll get a little cleaner here. So we set up a waiting column, and then those tickets would move into waiting while we're waiting for that external resource. And let's say that that external resource is called, you know, Team 25. And we have our, you know, in process and our done tickets, and you know, we have 3, and Team 25 has 3 things, and we're working away, and all of a sudden one day, the external resource is just simply not paying attention to us, and our board suddenly, you know, looks like this. Now let's say, even worse, let's say that we have a boss who has a very, 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 very short fuse, is a totally disagreeable person, and we really don't like them, and his wife runs Team 25. If we don't have this visualized, and we go to our boss and we say, Team 25 is destroying the productivity of our group, our boss is going to take that bottle and break it over our head. And somehow this boss manages to avoid HR. So we can't even go to HR and say, look, my head broke. But if we actually visualize this, and there's nothing in done, and this looks like this, and our boss comes moseying through the shop, and our boss goes, oh, shit. What am I going to do now? But again, as I said earlier, when we're visualizing our work, we can actually start to point at it and say we're doing too much. When we're visualizing our work now, we can start to, without words and without complaining, visually communicate blockages in the system that may have political sensitivity. And what we could start doing if we were really cranky is we could start saying things like, say the red pen is the amount of time that we spent working on the ticket. And so say we spent a day working on each of these tickets. And then the blue pen is the amount of time that we've been waiting on Team 25. All of a sudden we can start calculating the cost of delay, and we can start saying things like, I don't think Team 25 has our best interests at heart. Perhaps we should kill them. Or we should find another group to work with, one of the two, because it appears that those are the only two situations that we have. And this looks silly, but this happens a ridiculous amount of time. So let's say that the Team 25 isn't even really Team 25. Let's say Team 25, this is coding, and this is testing. And it looks the same. Without visualization, we've all lived through this, right? Coding doesn't stop. They're production maniacs. And they're just blasting away at stuff. And after a while, it becomes incredibly clear two things. One is that you have a 5 or 6 week release cycle, one day of which is actually spent coding, and the rest of it, everything's backed up. And the way that we deal with this when we're not visualizing it is the coders look in Jira and they know that all of this work that they've done hasn't been completed, hasn't been tested. And they go over and they start yelling at the testers. Or they go to their bosses and they start yelling about the testers. But what nobody does, or very rarely do, is walk over to testing and say, are you guys okay? Because this is ugly. At which point you find that there's so many sticky notes in the testing department that they're actually buried on the ground going, I can't move. And that's why they're not actually doing any testing, because they're completely covered in the detritus of software development process. Other options might be we don't have an environment to test the system in. How many people have worked in a situation like that where there was no testing environment and somehow we thought that the testers were at fault for that? So there are more than likely systemic reasons for these backups. And when we view this as a system, we tend to relate to others as a system. This act of blaming is what psychologists call fundamental attribution error, which is basically blaming the last person with something for the state that it's in. We suck at that. We are so bad about that. It is obscene. Because what we do as human beings when we approach any situation, regardless, like right now, entering the room, you do this. Your brain will scan the room. It will look for threats. Arch enemies, old girlfriends, Revenue Canada, whatever. And not seeing any, your brain fills itself with a plausible story for everything else, and then just kind of discards it. Otherwise, we would be processing everything in the room at the time. Like, are all those columns the same height? I can't tell. Maybe they aren't. I should probably measure those. We'd all go like crazy OCD. So when we approach a system where we're working and other things in the system seem to break down, we will never think of the system and we will never think about ourselves. We will always wonder what's wrong with the other people. What we also tend to do is we also tend to get annoyed with other people because they don't recognize how complicated or complex our work is. And they really should know that because their work is so damn simple. We're really messed up. I'm going to go off in an entirely different direction if one of two things doesn't happen. If I don't get a time check, and if nobody asks me a question.
Okay. 5 left for hour 15.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Then I'm not going to go in another direction. So you guys didn't get to hear about any of that stuff, which is okay, because most of this is just me ranting, right? You heard enough of that already. So then I'm going to close up by saying, making sure that I didn't miss anything that really needs to be talked about. The act of visualization, just psychologically, is incredibly powerful for any team. And I don't care if you keep doing iterations, I don't care if you go back to waterfall, I don't care what you're doing, but I'll give you a quick case in point. We started doing the kanban not understanding the impact that it was going to have on our agile processes, right? So we have this kanban up on the wall and tickets are flying through it and things are seeming pretty good. And then one day we're in a stand-up meeting and one of our developers says, do we still have to do stand-up meetings? I said, yeah. I said, the board already tells us everything. Why do we have to say what we're doing and what we did? Because the board already says that. And we're like, crap. Sit down. So I went away, thought about it for a day or so, and I came back and said, yes, we still have to do stand-up meetings. But from now on, we're going to talk about the board. We're not going to talk about ourselves. So we're going to talk about the system. And what we're not going to do is, and this is what I realized what was happening in stand-up meetings and why I will describe this by the craziest example possible. So up here, you guys are blessed to have Rogers, right? You all love Rogers and just walk around with your Rogers t-shirts. So you can't get enough of Rogers. So in the States, we have the same thing. It's called Comcast. And we were working with Comcast, and I said, they brought up an issue, and I said, well, do you talk about that in your daily stand-ups? And they said, no. We usually save that. I said, "Really save it for what?" And they said, we save that for the mega scrum. And I swear to God, nothing has struck fear in my heart more deeply than the words mega scrum. The first thing I got the picture of was 1,000 people in a room, but then that was quickly replaced with the picture with like this image of this giant, lurking, hulking Ken Schwaber that was like gonna, and I'm like, he's gonna eat me. After that hallucination passed and I got better, they said, yeah, well, it's on Thursday, so you can experience the Mega Scrum. And the Mega Scrum was poetic. It was so beautiful. So it was 85 people in a scrum, but it gets better. So they're in this huge circle, or actually serpentine thing throughout the cubes, and I can't hear what's going on the other side of the room, and I realize it's because 3 of the people are on the phone, and so people are grabbing the phone and saying, yesterday I did this, and today I'm going to do that, and I don't have any blockers, and they're passing it on. So they're like mumbling into the phone. So first of all, the people on the phone have to sit through that crap because they're scared they'll get fired if they don't. And everybody else in the room is just like, they don't know what the hell's going on. So if the board already tells us what we did yesterday, what we're going to do today, and if there are any blockers, now we can act. I'll put it this way. If I have a team of 8 people and every day they have to tell me what they're doing, something's seriously wrong with our internal communications because I should really know. It's not a huge number of people, right? So no one should have to get up every day and say things are normal. You shouldn't have to have a normal meeting. But what you can do is you can get up and talk about the things that aren't normal. And since we have this level of variation in our work, things are often not normal. There's always going to be something to talk about, right? So you can talk about weird tasks, you can talk about backups, you can talk about the actual option value of things that are coming up. So you can talk as a group about what you can pull and what you can't pull, what looks like a good idea. But going through every single day for the rest of my life, telling people that things are normal, it doesn't work for me. So this was like a really lousy thing to close on, doesn't it? Oh, I know what that was. It was a rant that sneaked up on me. So there's different layers of work. This is what I will close with. So when my book, David Anderson's book is capital K Kanban. Tony Ann's in my book is personal Kanban. In it, we're basically talking about small teams and individuals. Because we're focused on the team in Agile, but the Agiles are actually made up, or the teams are actually made up of people. So I do actually want to talk about the people as individuals, and then I want to talk about the other side, as the rest of the organization. Tony Ann and I were blessed, and in 2 weeks we'll go to the ceremony for this. But we were blessed with winning a Shingo Prize, which is like the highest honor in Lean, which freaked us right out. Because it's usually given to like auto manufacturing plants. And they gave it to us because of the book. And they're like, and the write-up that the Shingo Board of Examiners, it was like this global group of people, they basically said this is the most accessible description of lean ever. And we're just like, crap. So, and I tell you that, I tell you that because I'm just crazy proud of it, but I also tell you that because when I was getting up and talking about this for like the last 5 years, I really didn't feel, I felt like I'd seen it work, but I didn't feel like it had been vetted by any vettable object, right? And so when they came back and said that, then all of a sudden I was like, wow, that's pretty cool. So, one of the problems with like one of these hour things is that now I have a huge backlog of things that I haven't said in my head, and I'm having a hard time with the Zeigarnik effect because I have so many things that are actually working their way into my work in progress, and my mouth wants to say them, but I can't say them. So what I'm going to do instead is just summarily shut myself up and ask for questions. Yep.
To what detail would you put each and every card of those? Like, normally what I do is I have a card for 2 hours job, and then another one for 4 hours job. It depends. Like, so what would be the optimum?
So, at the beginning, for most people have actually no idea what they're doing. And so what I want them to do initially is just visualize what's actually happening and then start to make those determinations based on a set of criteria that are actually fairly unique to your situation. So if I'm an admin assistant and I have over the course of the day 2 or 3 2-hour tasks that I need to do, and then a ridiculous number of random interruptions that come in. The way I size my tasks are going to be very different than if I'm a developer, or anyway, if I'm a developer, I'll be different from project to project even if I'm still just me. So there's that issue. The second issue is you have personal level work, team level work, group level work, organizational level work, and so on and so forth. And each one of those levels, you're going to be looking at work at different granularities. So, if you're a CEO, you're going to want to find out where various initiatives that you have are in flight. And if you're all the way down on the ground, you're going to be dealing with the task level. What I will say to that is that, again, I'll go back to this one, wherever it is that our goal is to see these tickets flow across the thing. So when Tony Ann and I started writing the book, we put up a ticket on the wall that said "Write Book." That didn't work very well. On the other hand, neither did Write Chapter 3. We tried that for a while. And what we realized was that we actually needed to build an entire value stream around just writing the book, because the elements of writing the book were substantially different than any other work that we were taking on at the time. And very quickly, I'll go up. This is why I use paper and not a whiteboard, by the way. So let's say up here is project A, and then down here is ready, draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, and done. Up here is project 1, down here is document 1. So you can do different swim lanes and then just move through things at the same time, and then handle your whip as need be. The UN Food and Agriculture office in Rome, they have kanban boards on the wall that are giant targets, and on the outside are ideas. and then those ideas get vetted, and then those vetted ideas get studied, and then those studied ideas become potential projects, and then when they actually become projects, then they go in the middle. So it's basically, as it's hardened or more collaborative, it goes in the middle, and then when it gets in the middle, it sits there until it's actually deployed, and then it goes out to a deployment Kanban. It's crazy, but we can draw these in any way, shape, or form. I'll tell you one of the problems with this, because people always say, what's the problems with this? The problem is, this is falsely linear. So, you know, here, I don't want to use red, I want to use green. Here we've got coding and testing, you know, and there might be, you know, more than a little bit of churn between the two of those, right? Which is one of the reasons why many teams that start using Kanban, after a short period of time, they'll start to question why these are separate groups. And then after a while, coding and testing will be properly integrated. Yeah, I know I said properly. And so we start to question, you know, the silos that we've seen. So I've seen very, very strange corporate organizations. And one of my favorites was, there was a group, it's very, very, very structured. They had a very scientific system set up, very, very well run. They had about 115 developers, and they were divided up into 3 groups that rarely ever dealt with each other. The first one was front end, the second one was middleware, and the third one was back end. And in order to deal with any of the 3, you had to go through their vice presidents and so forth. So literally nothing could ever get done in this organization. It was awesome. It's like process consultant candy. You're just like, really? You're doing that? Thanks. Can I just sit and watch? Because this is so dysfunctional, I can't believe it. I suggest you all set your companies up with that just for like a couple of weeks, just to see what happens. Make sure you make everybody a vice president on that day too. So any other questions? Yeah.
Just your might be on your first sheet up there, but proper spelling of your name of your company, your website, and the name of your book.
Yeah. So the paper moved, so it's not personnel Kanban, it's a personal Kanban. The website is personalkanban.com. The book is Personal Kanban. I have no children named Personal Kanban, but could get close to that. My actual company name is Modus Cooperandi. Yeah. This is the correct spelling of my name. Other people have called me different things, but those are incorrect spellings of my name. No F's in Jim Benson. Yeah, that's me. And that's how I tweet. Both Tony Ann, my co-author Tony Ann, who is a wonderful woman, and everybody should meet her at some point. Her Twitter handle is this. And she is wonderful and smart and amazing and a joy to be around, and fun to follow on Twitter. We tweet a lot about exactly what I've been talking about, which is basically the intersection of logical process systems and the human mind. And we think about this stuff potentially way too much. One of the other things that I'll mention is on January 30th and 31st, not January, July, so it's much prettier. We put on something called Kaizen Camp. It's down in Seattle, and it's cheap, and I like to eat good food, so we have awesome food at Kaizen Camp. The food is seriously worth coming on. But what we usually have 100, well, we've always had 150 people regardless, but this year we're doing 175 because the state of Washington is sending a ton of people. But what this is it's all about talking about the future of work, quality of life, continuous improvement at work, and it's not only software people. So we'll have people there from healthcare and government and manufacturing and education and software development and blah, 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 blah. And what ends up happening then is we get a really rich, deep conversation. It's a pseudo open space. There are no speakers, they're just, conversations. The conversations tend to be deep and fantastic, and that's in July. Every year, a couple of people from the Commonwealth will come down and see the Yanks. Kind of point. Look at that, eh? And we put on a pretty good show. So I would love it. I'd love to see people come down for that as well.
Are there any other questions for Jim? Just a reminder that tomorrow's all-day session starts at 9 o'clock. Again, the price tag is a little steeper than this, but I've heard good things about the way Jim runs the workshop. Give it a thought. So, no more questions. Let's thank Jim.